She was breathing dust in silence. Smoke choked the valley, rising in slow, black ribbons that blurred the ridgelines and burned her lungs. The wind screamed through the canyon like a dying breath, hollow, ragged, endless. Around her, chaos, radios crackling, voices overlapping, the sound of a mission going wrong in real time. And somewhere below that smoke, people were dying. She crouched low, helmet pressed to rock, the metallic taste of fear mixing with grit. Sofia Marquez wasn't supposed to be here, not this close, not this exposed. But that was the thing about combat. Nobody asks permission before the world collapses. The radio in her ear was a wall of panic. "We're pinned. Contact left. We've got wounded." Another voice broke through, desperate, loud. "Daniels is hit. I can't see Kavak." Then static. Then silence. Sophia's heartbeat filled the gap. Her gloved hand reached for the silver casing in her chest pocket, a piece of worn metal no bigger than a fingertip, engraved with two words: "Silence speaks." Her father's words. She closed her eyes, just long enough to remember his voice. "Noise is what amateurs make," he used to say. "Professionals, they let the silence do the work." When she opened her eyes again, the valley was a war zone of broken light and smoke. Somewhere ahead, her team, her brothers in arms, were surrounded. And somewhere among the enemy's laughter, someone had shouted the words that tore through her like a blade. "The SEAL sniper's dead." That was the moment it changed, not just the mission, her life. Because they weren't entirely wrong, the sniper was dead, at least the version they thought they knew, the quiet girl in the corner, the logistics officer, the one the team called Token when they thought she couldn't hear. She adjusted her rifle sling and looked toward the ridge. Smoke curled around her like ghosts whispering secrets. She took a slow breath, steady, deliberate. If they thought she was dead, maybe that was her advantage. A week earlier, the world was clean and organized, the kind of order only the military could create. Forward operating Base Falcon, Afghanistan. The air smelled of oil and coffee. Tents lined up in straight rows, flags fluttering over sandbags. It was another day, another mission brief. She stood at the back of the room as usual. The briefing table was crowded with men, all muscle and swagger. Captain Reeves hovered over a topographic map, voice steady, eyes sharp. "Target is a weapons cache in the Shazak Valley. Intel confirms heavy arms movement. We'll infiltrate at dusk, plant charges, and exfil before dawn." Markers scraped the map like gunfire. Sophia watched from the edges, silent, observant. The only woman in a room full of men who'd already decided she didn't belong. Reeves didn't even look her way. "Marquez, you're on logistics support. Stay with the vehicles. Monitor comms." There it was again, support. Always behind the line. Always in the shadow of someone else's definition of her. Daniels, one of the team snipers, smirked. "Don't worry, Token. We'll handle the real work." Kavak chuckled, low, dismissive. Sophia didn't flinch, didn't even glance their way. She just touched her chest pocket, the casing, and nodded once. "Understood, sir." But inside, something burned. Not anger exactly, something colder. The kind of determination that doesn't need to raise its voice. That night she cleaned her rifle alone. The Barrett M82A1, 50 caliber precision, heavy enough to break a spine, accurate enough to break arrogance. She ran the cleaning rod through the barrel with slow precision, each motion deliberate, ritualistic. This wasn't about killing. It never had been. It was about control over breath, over chaos, over herself. In the stillness of her tent, she heard echoes from years ago. Her father's voice again, calm, patient. "Never rush a shot, Mija. The world will always rush you, don't let it. Control is your weapon, everything else is noise." He died when she was 14. Fallujah, IED. They'd sent home his rifle and that single silver casing. She carried it through everything that came after: the Naval Academy, Bud S. Sniper School, all the places where they said she couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. She had outshot them all, broken records, outlasted Hell Week, earned her trident. And still they looked right past her. Dawn. Her alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but she was awake. She always was before missions. The base was quiet, just the hum of generators and the faint sound of wind against fabric. She laced her boots slowly, tying the laces tight. In the mirror, her reflection looked back, tired eyes, sunburned skin, hair tucked under a regulation cap. Invisible, that was how they liked her. She whispered softly the words her father taught her: "Let my silence speak when words fail." And then she was ready. The Chinook thundered across the valley at dusk. The sound vibrated through her chest, the familiar, heavy rhythm of flight and fear. Through the open ramp, the world below looked like something ancient and wounded: jagged ridges, winding rivers, a landscape carved by centuries of war. The mountains glowed gold in the dying light. Sophia sat in the back, hands on her rifle, eyes forward. Reeves gave the team one final look. "We hit the target, set the charges, and get out clean. Stay tight, stay quiet." Daniels grinned. "Always quiet, sir, unless Marquez starts taking notes again." The laughter was small but sharp. She smiled faintly, just enough to pass for polite. The ramp dropped. Dust exploded upward. The smell of burned fuel mixed with the dry air. They moved out 2 columns, precise, professional, rehearsed. For 2 hours, everything worked exactly as it should. Then at the edge of the valley, something shifted. A crow's cry, sharp, echoing. A sound too deliberate, too perfectly placed in the wind. She paused, looked up. The others didn't notice. Reeves was calling coordinates. Daniels was checking his optics. Sophia's gut twisted, a sniper's instinct honed from a lifetime of listening to silence. Something was wrong. And a moment later, the world exploded. The ambush hit them from 3 directions. Machine gun fire tore through the twilight like ripping metal. RPGs screamed down from the ridges. The shockwave threw Sophia against a rock, her rifle clattering beside her. She hit the ground hard, gasped, felt the dirt in her teeth. Screams, orders, chaos. She dragged herself behind cover, radio pressed to her ear. "Daniels is hit. Kavek not responding. We need support." Reeves' voice cut through, clipped and strained. "Fall back to Rally Point Alpha, move." But there was nowhere to move. The canyon was a trap, narrow, steep, perfect for slaughter. The enemy had been waiting. Sophia pressed against the boulder, heart hammering. Her breath fogged the air in front of her. She peeked over the edge, muzzle flashes everywhere, tracer rounds stitching fire through the smoke. And then she heard them. The enemy's voices shouting across the ridge, laughing. The SEAL snipers dead. They were celebrating. Her team was dying. Her pulse slowed, strange, unnatural, not fear, focus. She looked toward the slope above her, 70 meters up, a rock ledge with a perfect view of the valley. No one was looking there. Her mind did the math automatically: angles, distances, wind speeds. If she could make it up there. Her fingers brushed the silver casing. Her father's voice again, calm and sure. "Silence doesn't beg for respect, Mija. It earns it." She made her decision in one breath. The Barrett came out of its case, heavy and cold. She slung it over her back and started to climb. No radio calls, no requests, just motion, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. The mountain clawed at her hands. The Barrett, dragging at her shoulders like gravity itself, was testing her resolve. But she kept going, every step a memory of the hundreds of times she'd climbed training towers in the dark, every pull a defiance of every man who'd told her she couldn't. Below, gunfire raged. Her team was fatting. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. Not yet. When she reached the ledge, she went prone, body pressed flat against the earth. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to her scope. Through it she saw everything, the chaos, the muzzle flashes, the faces of men certain they'd already won. Her finger rested on the trigger. She whispered under her breath, "Let my silence speak." Then she fired. The shot cracked through the valley, sharp, distant, echoing off the rock like thunder remembering its purpose. A man halfway through a laugh dropped mid-sentence. The flag in his hands fluttered to the ground, weightless, stunned by its own freedom. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Sophia chambered another round. Through her scope, she watched the others freeze, confusion painted across their faces. If the sniper was dead, who just pulled the trigger? And that question, that single perfect question, was all the opening she needed. She adjusted her sights, exhaled halfway, and pulled the trigger again. The silence answered for her. The second shot broke something deeper than the sound barrier. It shattered belief. The enemy froze, scattered shapes in the smoke, caught between instinct and disbelief. They'd already written the story in their minds. The sniper was gone, the Americans were broken, the valley belonged to them. And then one of their commanders crumpled mid-word. His radio tumbled down the rock, still squawking commands that no one would ever follow. Sophia didn't blink, didn't even flinch. She adjusted her position, her breath steady, her pulse slow. 1,200 meters. Wind 4 knots east. Temperature drop 3 degrees. Target angle descending 20. Mathematics and instinct, 2 languages she spoke fluently. She fired again. A third man fell. This time, panic spread like wildfire. Someone shouted orders in Pashto. Others screamed back, arguing, scrambling for cover. But there was no cover from what they couldn't see. Down below, the SEALs were crawling behind shattered rock, dragging their wounded. Captain Reeves pressed his back to a boulder, gasping, his radio covered in dust. "Who the hell is shooting?" he muttered. Daniels, bleeding from the arm, tried to laugh. "Who cares? Just don't stop her." But Reeves knew the truth before anyone said it aloud. He looked up toward the ridge, that high, impossible ledge no one could reach under fire. And his voice came through the radio, half disbelief, half prayer. "Marquez, that you?" No response. Just another crack. Another body dropped. Silence speaking louder than anything else on that mountain. Sophia's world was shrinking. Through the scope, time didn't move in seconds anymore. It moved in breaths. Every inhale a calculation, every exhale a choice. Her father's lessons played in the back of her mind like distant echoes. "You're not aiming at a target, Mija. You're aiming at the space between moments. You find stillness there, the kind that wins wars without noise." She had found it now, that impossible stillness. Her heartbeat was the only sound she heard. She chambered another round, the Barrett's bolt sliding smooth, mechanical, precise. Her hands didn't shake. The dirt under her elbows was hot, trembling from the shockwaves below. She looked through the scope and saw faces, not just enemies, but men who believed they were untouchable. Their confidence, their laughter, their cruelty. It was all fading. One shot at a time. Reeves shouted over the radio again. "We've got wounded. If that's you, Marquez, keep laying fire." Still no response. He turned toward Daniels, eyes wide. She wasn't supposed to even. Daniels cut him off, voice raw. "Yeah, well, maybe we should stop telling her what she's supposed to do." Sophia couldn't hear them, but something inside her shifted just the same. A quiet resolve hardening into purpose. For months she'd been invisible, tolerated, dismissed, politely ignored. Now the same people who couldn't see her were alive because of her silence. The irony wasn't lost on her. She exhaled again. The next shot tore through the mountain air, snapping like a whip. A machine gunner dropped before he could even traverse his weapon. Another fell trying to pull him to safety. Sophia tracked, fired, adjusted, fired again. Her rhythm was perfect: breathe, squeeze, repeat. The kind of calm that terrifies anyone watching because it means she's not reacting, she's orchestrating. From the outside, it looked effortless. From inside her scope, it was pure discipline, a lifetime of quiet defiance honed into one perfect act of control. The enemy finally tried to counter. A sniper on the far ridge, 2 clicks out, caught her glint for half a heartbeat and fired. The round hit 2 meters wide, spraying rock fragments across her cheek. A warm trickle of blood slid down her jaw. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her scope shifted by a fraction. She saw the shimmer of his scope. 2 breaths later, she sent her answer. The .50 caliber round hit like thunder, finding its mark. Through the scope, she saw him slump, his weapon falling away into the dust. Sophia whispered, "Silence speaks." The seals below were still pinned but alive. That was new. They'd stopped dying. That was new too. Captain Reeves finally broke radio silence. "All units cover fire. Marquez, keep 'em scared." Daniels grinned despite the pain in his arm. "Marquez, you mean token girl." Kovac glanced at him, grim. "Not anymore." They started moving, pulling the wounded toward the rally point while Sophia's rounds tore the enemy's coordination apart. Every 7 seconds, another shot. Every shot, another ripple of confusion and terror. The insurgents had lost rhythm, lost control. One man, braver than the rest, tried to climb toward her ledge, thinking he could find her position. He didn't make it halfway. The round hit center mass. He fell backward, tumbling until the mountain decided it had seen enough. Sophia's magazine clicked empty. She reloaded smoothly, counting without thought. Her breathing never changed. Her focus, though, it shifted. Through her scope, she caught sight of a wounded SEAL, Hayes, the corpsman. He was bent over another man, blood all over his gloves, refusing to stop working even as rounds tore the ground around him. She admired that kind of courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. That was her kind of soldier. And that was the moment she realized something simple, almost poetic: silence wasn't just her weapon. It was her language, and tonight she was fluent. 3 minutes into the ambush, the battlefield had changed. Where there had been chaos, now there was confusion. Where there had been certainty, now there was fear. 12 targets down, maybe more. Sophia's shots had turned the enemy's confidence into superstition. One of them shouted in their language, words carried by the wind, something about ghosts, about death that walks unseen. They weren't wrong. From below, Daniels whispered, almost reverent, "It's like she's everywhere." Reeves didn't answer. He was too busy scanning the ridges, trying to see the woman they'd ignored for almost a year now, rewriting their story one shot at a time. When the last enemy line broke, Sophia stopped firing. She didn't need to chase them. Fear would finish what her bullets started. She kept her eye on the scope, scanning for movement. Her finger hovered over the trigger, calm, patient. The smoke cleared slowly. The wind shifted. And for the first time since the ambush began, the only sound left was the wind moving through the valley, empty, aimless, alive. She pulled her head away from the scope, exhaled fully. For a moment, she just lay there, cheek against the dirt, body shaking not from fear but release. Then she sat up, sliding the silver casing from her pocket. The engraving caught the last light of the setting sun. Silence speaks. Her father's creed. Her life's truth. Her proof. Down below, the SEALs emerged from behind cover one by one, eyes scanning the ridge. Daniels limped over to Reeves, blood staining his sleeve. "She just did in 90 seconds what 3 of us couldn't do in 15 minutes. Reeves didn't answer. He just looked up toward the ledge where smoke still curled around her silhouette. He keyed his radio. "Marquez, report." "Static." Then her voice calm, steady, distant. "Targets neutralized. You're clear to move." Reeves swallowed. "Copy that." There was a pause before he added, softer this time, "Good work, Lieutenant." Her reply was short, "Just doing my job, sir." But her tone carried something else, not pride, not defiance, something quieter. Completion. When the extraction bird thundered in, the valley was burning behind them. Sophia walked down the slope, her Barrett slung, boots silent against the gravel. The men turned to watch her approach, the same ones who used to look through her now staring like they were seeing her for the first time. Kavek muttered, "Jesus Christ, she's real." Daniels laughed, broken but alive. "Yeah, and we called her Token." She passed them without a word, just a nod. Reeves met her halfway. For once he didn't have orders, didn't have corrections. He just looked at her, the dust, the blood, the calm in her eyes, and said quietly, "You saved us." Sophia looked past him toward the smoke curling over the horizon. "Team saved itself, sir." Reeves shook his head. "You were the team tonight." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Later aboard the Chinook, nobody spoke. The wind from the open ramp whipped through the cabin, scattering sand across the deck. Wounded men lay still, hooked to IV lines. Others sat staring into nothing, that 1,000-yard gaze that only comes after surviving something that should have killed you. Sophia sat apart, her Barrett across her knees, field stripping it by touch. Each movement was muscle memory, mechanical calm against the storm inside her. Reeves finally walked over. He hesitated, then sat across from her. For a long time he didn't speak. Then simply, "We owe you everything." She didn't look up, "Just did my job, sir." He nodded slowly, almost ashamed. "Your job was logistics." She paused, set down the rifle, met his eyes. "My job," she said quietly, "is being a SEAL." For the first time, he had no answer. He stood, placed a hand on her shoulder, brief, honest, and walked away. The rest of the team watched in silence. And for the first time in her career, that silence didn't feel like dismissal. It felt like respect. The helicopter's rotors slowed to silence, leaving only the low hum of the base generators and the ringing in everyone's ears. They had landed. But nobody moved. 200 meters away, a row of floodlights cast long, sharp shadows across the landing strip. Dust swirled in slow motion under the blades. The air still smelled of gunpowder and burnt cordite, the kind of smell that doesn't wash off for days. Sophia stood in the back of the Chinook, helmet still on, rifle slung across her chest. The others sat in silence, wounded, exhausted, hollowed out. No jokes this time, no sideways looks. When Reeves gave the nod to disembark, the first thing the men noticed wasn't the crowd, it was the quiet. Because half the base was there. Mechanics, medics, pilots, analysts, even cooks had come out. 200 people stood lined along the tarmac, saying nothing. No cheering, no clapping, just silence. It was a kind of reverence no ceremony could fake. Sophia stepped off the ramp first, boots hitting the ground softly. The others followed behind, moving slow, limping, carrying each other. And as she passed through the crowd, people stepped aside. Nobody saluted, nobody spoke. They just looked at her, the woman they dismissed as background noise, now walking through the aftermath of her own legend. The silver casing in her pocket felt heavier tonight. In the debrief room, the fluorescent lights hummed, flickering faintly. The air was thick with paperwork and fatigue. Reeves sat at the table across from her, uniform torn, bandaged hand gripping a pen. Across the room, 2 intelligence officers typed furiously, trying to keep up. "Let's start from the top," one said. "We need your field report, Lieutenant. Every range, every shot." Sophia stared at the blank report form in front of her. 12 lines, 12 kills, 90 seconds. She could fill it easily: data, windage, coordinates, shot order. That part was easy. But how do you document something like that? She met their eyes briefly. You wouldn't understand it on paper. One of the analysts frowned. Ma'am, this is protocol. I know, she said. That's the problem. Reeves almost smiled. The kind of tired, humbled smile that said he finally understood. The older intelligence officer leaned forward. Lieutenant, where did you learn to shoot like that? Sophia paused. Her hand moved instinctively to her chest pocket. She touched the metal casing through the fabric. My father. Outside, night fell slowly over the base. From the barracks window, she could see the faint outline of the mountains, dark shapes against the fading sky. The same mountains that had swallowed her team, tested her silence, and gave her a voice without sound. She sat on the edge of her bunk, still in her dusty uniform, rifle case at her feet. Her body ached from every muscle that had held tension for too long. But her mind was still somewhere up there in the valley. Every shot replayed like a ghost she couldn't turn off. Every breath, every trigger pull. And underneath it all, her father's voice again. Control isn't about staying calm, Mija. It's about knowing when to let go. She'd let go that night, of fear, of permission, of needing to be seen. The silence had finally spoken for her. The next morning, the base woke to rumors. Someone in comms had replayed the combat recording. The call signs, the chaos, and then that calm, almost impossible voice breaking through the static. Targets neutralized, you're clear to move. By noon, everyone had heard it. The supply clerk, the med techs, the maintenance crews. The quiet logistics officer who'd never raised her voice had saved an entire SEAL team alone, with 12 shots, 12 kills, and not a single wasted word. They called her the ghost of Shazak Valley before the day was over. By the second day, it was simply Marquez. No rank, no prefix, just a name that meant precision and silence and something more: proof. 3 days later, she returned to the range. It was early. The sun hadn't risen yet and the cold bit deep. She set up her Barrett on the far end, hands steady. The world around her was still, quiet, just wind and breath. Her first shot cracked through the morning fog, echoing across the compound. A perfect hit at 800 meters. She didn't stop. Round after round, she sent each bullet downrange with metronomic rhythm. It wasn't about training anymore. It was about centering, about grounding herself in the one thing she could still control. Behind her, a familiar voice broke the silence. Daniel's, arm in a sling, expression raw. You never miss, do you? Sophia didn't turn. Sometimes, but not when it matters. He stood quietly, watching her fire again. After a long moment, he said softly, I owe you an apology. She lowered her rifle, finally facing him. For what? For everything, he said. For the jokes, for not seeing what was right in front of me. She studied him, not with judgment but quiet honesty. You wouldn't be the first, she said, won't be the last. He smiled weakly. Still doesn't make it right. Sophia nodded once, then extended her hand. Then make it mean something. He shook it, the gesture firm, respectful. No words could have said more. Kovac's apology came differently. No speech, no eye contact. He just showed up at her door one evening, holding two things: a steaming mug of her favorite coffee and a small black box. Inside the box was a rifle scope, top tier, custom-tuned, impossible to requisition officially. He set it down on her desk, nodded once, and left without a word. She smiled faintly. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. In the Tactical Operations Center, the seating chart changed quietly. Nobody announced it, nobody asked. When Captain Reeves held the next mission briefing, Sophia took the seat beside him, front and center. Not at the back, not near the door. When she spoke, people listened. When she offered input on Overwatch placement and recon timing, the others didn't interrupt. And when she finished, Reeves just nodded and said, "Sounds good, Lieutenant." No sarcasm, no qualifiers. Respect earned, not given. In the barracks that night, someone had chalked 2 words on the wall above her bunk. Silence speaks. No one admitted to writing it. And she didn't erase it. Because for once, it didn't feel like a reminder of being unheard. It felt like a truth. A week later, Command held a ceremony. The press called it a commendation event. Medals, speeches, handshakes. They wanted to give her the Silver Star. She declined. Not out of modesty, but because she understood something the brass didn't. Some acts lose their meaning when turned into headlines. Some things only stay pure in silence. "Give it to Hayes," she said. "The corpsman, he kept 3 men alive under fire. That's real heroism." The officers hesitated. "Lieutenant, your actions." "I did my job," she said. "He went beyond his." They didn't understand, but they complied. At the ceremony, Hayes received his medal. Sophia stood in the back, hands behind her, expression calm. When he found her afterward, eyes glassy, he tried to thank her. She shook her head. "Don't, you earned it." He swallowed hard. "We both did." Maybe, but she wasn't chasing recognition. Her silence had already said everything she needed it to. That night, under the dim barracks light, Sophia placed the silver casing on her bunk. She stared at it for a long time, remembering the day her father gave it to her, his calloused hand closing over hers, the smell of gun oil in the air, his voice low and steady. "Never talk about what you can prove, Mija. Let your actions be the conversation." She smiled softly. "Guess I learned that one." When she fell asleep, it was the first night in months without nightmares. But legends don't sleep. By morning, word had spread beyond the base. Other SEAL units, then Rangers, then Force Recon. Everyone heard the story: 12 shots, 12 kills, 1 woman. The sniper who came back from the dead. They called her Shadow Hawk, Silent Storm, Death's Whisper, names she never asked for. To her, they all meant the same thing. A reminder of a night when silence saved lives. Weeks later, she stood in front of her unit during a routine debrief. The men sat around the table: Reeves, Daniels, Kovac, Hayes, waiting. Sophia reached into her pocket and set the silver casing in the center of the table. Its surface was worn smooth, the words barely visible. "Silence speaks," she said quietly. No one interrupted. "My father carried this through 3 deployments," she continued. "He said the most dangerous warriors aren't the ones who talk the loudest. They're the ones you never see coming, the ones who don't need to be noticed to make the difference." She looked up. "That's who we should be." Reeves picked up the casing, turning it between his fingers. "Permission to make this our symbol." Sophia nodded once. Permission granted. By the end of the month, every man in the unit carried one. Not issued, not ordered. They paid for them themselves, small silver replicas, engraved with those same 2 words. Some wore them on chains. Some kept them in chest pockets over their hearts. One had it tattooed on his ribs with the date of the Shazak Valley etched beneath. It became a creed. A reminder that strength doesn't shout. It simply acts. The desert wind carried the sound of aircraft across the base, a constant, distant hum, the heartbeat of a world that never truly slept. Weeks had passed since Shazak Valley, but its echo lingered in every corridor, every conversation. They didn't speak about it directly, not much, but people didn't have to. Every operator who crossed paths with Lieutenant Sofia Marquez knew. They saw the small silver casing hanging from her neck. They saw the men who used to call her Token, now walking beside her like equals. Respect had a new sound now. It was quiet. She woke early as always. No alarm, no schedule, just habit, the kind built over years of needing time alone before the world woke up. The air was cold, thin, the kind that bit into your lungs and cleared your thoughts. She brewed her coffee, black, unsweetened, and watched the sunrise bleed across the desert through the thin barracks window. It was strange. She survived the kind of night that rewrites a person, but her morning rituals hadn't changed. Same coffee, same boots, same silent reflection. Maybe that was her way of staying grounded, routine as survival. She sat on the edge of her bunk, fingers tracing the small scratches on the casing around her neck. Each mark told a story, years of wear, years of meaning. Her father's words whispered again in the back of her mind. Don't chase the noise, Mija, it fades, but silence stays. She didn't realize it then, but she was living proof. In the training yard, the world was noise again. Gunfire shouted commands, the metallic clatter of equipment. New recruits lined up under the brutal morning sun. Young, nervous, full of energy that hadn't yet learned patience. Sophia walked across the range with her Barrett slung low, her steps quiet against the gravel. The moment she appeared, conversation softened, not out of fear, out of something deeper. Recognition. Ma'am, Lieutenant Marquez, one of the instructors called out, voice respectful but uncertain. We didn't expect. I'm not here to expect anything, she said calmly, just observing. He nodded quickly. Sophia moved down the line, watching each recruit take their shots. The sharp cracks of rifles filled the air. One young woman, maybe 19, stood out immediately, not for skill, but for the tremor in her hands. Sophia stopped behind her. Name? The recruit startled, glancing back. Cadet Lopez, ma'am. Sophia studied her posture, shoulders tight, breathing uneven. You're overthinking your breath, she said softly. Don't fight it, just listen to it. Lopez frowned slightly. Ma'am. Sophia crouched beside her, her voice low but firm. The rifle doesn't need your tension, it needs your control. There's a difference. Lopez nodded, swallowing hard. Again, Sophia said. The recruit took a breath, steadied and fired. The round hit center mass. Sophia smiled faintly. Better. Lopez turned, eyes wide. Ma'am, how do you stay calm when everything's, she hesitated, when it's all falling apart? Sophia looked at her for a long moment before answering. You don't, you just slow down the fall. Lopez blinked, unsure whether that was wisdom or warning. Sophia continued, quieter this time. Control doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you use the fear to focus. You make it work for you. That's what my father taught me. The young recruit nodded, silent, listening to every word like it was air. When Sophia walked away, Lopez exhaled, lighter, steadier, changed. Later that day, Reeves found Sophia on the range. He leaned against the barrier, arms crossed, watching her shoot. Still breaking your own records, I see, he said. She didn't look up, just keeping sharp. He smirked, sharp's an understatement. She ejected a magazine, slid in another, chambered around, and finally glanced at him. You need something, sir. Reeves hesitated, unusual for him. Command wants you to consider instructing. She raised an eyebrow. Instructing. At sniper school, stateside, they want you to teach the next generation. You'd have full discretion. Sophia cleaned her barrel slowly, thinking. You mean they want to put me behind a desk again? Reeves shook his head. No, they want your story to mean something. You've become a symbol, Marquez. She gave a faint, ironic smile. Symbols can't shoot back. Reeves chuckled. Maybe not, but they can change minds. She didn't answer immediately. The sound of distant gunfire filled the pause. Then quietly she said, I'll think about it. Reeves nodded. That's all I ask. He turned to leave but stopped. For what it's worth, he said over his shoulder. We're all still talking about that night. The way you held it together, I don't think anyone'll ever forget it. Sophia looked down at her rifle, expression unreadable. That's not why I did it. Reeves nodded again, more to himself than to her. I know, that's why it matters. That evening, she walked the perimeter of the base alone. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the desert in soft gold. Her shadow stretched long against the sand, a reminder that sometimes the quietest presence can still cast the longest reach. She stopped at the firing range, empty now, the targets riddled with holes from a day's worth of training. She sat on a crate, the silver casing in her hand. Her thoughts drifted to the recruits, to Lopez, to the next generation trying to find their place in a system that still measured strength too narrowly. Maybe Reeves was right. Maybe her silence could speak louder through others now. But she wasn't sure she wanted to be anyone's legend. Legends don't rest. Legends get rewritten. And she was just tired. Still, as the wind shifted, carrying the faint sounds of laughter and conversation from the barracks, she felt something unfamiliar, a small warmth breaking through the cold weight she'd carried for so long. Maybe this was what peace looked like, not absence of war, but a moment of quiet between battles. She pocketed the casing and whispered to the dusk, "Thanks, Dad." Days turned into weeks. Sophia's name spread across branches. Marines talked about her in hushed tones at forward bases. Air Force pilots mentioned her in ready rooms. Even Army Rangers repeated the story, the woman sniper who came back from the dead and saved a team with silence alone. But she didn't chase the attention, didn't seek validation. When young operators reached out, women especially, she met with them privately. No press, no speeches. They came with questions, fears, doubts. "Lieutenant, what if they don't take me seriously?" "They won't," she'd say plainly. "Not at first. That's not failure, that's opportunity. While they underestimate you, you're learning, preparing. That's the space where you grow stronger." Another asked, "How do you handle being alone out there?" Sophia thought for a long time before answering. You stop expecting the world to see you, and you start seeing yourself. One evening, Lopez, the same recruit from the range, found her sitting outside the hangar, legs crossed, rifle across her lap. "Ma'am." Sophia looked up, smiling faintly. "You again." Lopez hesitated, then stepped closer. "I just wanted to thank you. You were right, about control, about silence. I passed my sniper qualification today." Sophia stood, extended her hand. "Congratulations." Lopez shook it, eyes shining. "They told me I broke the 900-meter mark." Sophia smiled, genuine and proud. "Good, but remember the record doesn't matter." Lopez tilted her head. "Then what does?" Sophia looked toward the horizon, the same mountains that once tested her. "What you do when the noise starts," she said softly. "Anyone can shoot when it's quiet, but when everything's falling apart, that's when silence decides who you really are." Lopez nodded, her expression thoughtful, steady. As she walked away, Sophia called after her, "Lopez." The young woman turned. Sophia tossed her the silver casing hanging from her neck. "Carry this. Pass it on when you find someone who needs it more." Lopez caught it, stunned. "Ma'am, I can't." "You can," Sophia said. "That's how legacies work." Later, Reeves found Sophia standing near the airfield, watching the transport planes take off into the fading light. He stood beside her quietly. "You really gave it to her?" he asked. Sophia nodded. "It's just metal, the meaning stays." Reeves looked at her profile, calm, unflinching, but softer now. "You ever think about what you want next?" She took a long breath. "I used to think it was proving myself. Now, maybe it's teaching others not to have to." Reeves smiled. "That's the difference between soldiers and leaders." She glanced at him. "Which one am I?" "Both," he said simply. "The dangerous kind." That night, as the stars spilled across the sky, Sophia sat outside the barracks again, same spot, same silence. But this time she wasn't alone. The wind carried faint voices, new recruits sharing stories about her. Some exaggerated, some wrong, all reverent. She smiled faintly. Maybe legends weren't about accuracy. Maybe they were about belief, giving people something to hold onto when the world demanded proof. She closed her eyes, leaned back against the wall, and whispered one last thought to the night. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And as the base lights flickered against the desert wind, her silence spoke louder than ever. The flight home was quiet. No music, no chatter, just the low hum of the C-17's engines and the muted breathing of soldiers half asleep in their seats. Sophia sat by the window, helmet off, staring at nothing. The clouds rolled beneath the aircraft like ocean tides, endless and white. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like loss. Every deployment had an end. Every mission had an after. But coming home, that was different. Coming home meant facing a world that had moved on without you, that didn't understand what silence cost. Her reflection in the glass looked older than 26. Eyes sharper, jaw tighter. She wondered if her father had looked the same way on his flights back. When the flight attendant passed, offering water, Sophia smiled politely and took one. Her voice was soft when she said, "Thanks." It was the first word she'd spoken in hours. Stateside didn't feel like home. It felt like noise. Reporters wanted interviews. Command wanted photo ops. Magazines wanted cover stories. She refused every single one. Reeves had warned her, "They'll keep calling, Lieutenant. The Navy likes its heroes neat and visible." She just nodded, "Then they'll have to find another one." Because she didn't feel like a hero. Heroes go home clean. She came home carrying the echoes of gunfire and the memory of 12 breaths that would never be taken again. Her apartment was small, neat, sterile, quiet. She kept it the way she left it 2 years ago. One bookshelf, one bed, one photo on the wall. Her father in uniform, his arm around her teenage shoulders. She traced the edge of the frame with her fingertips, her throat tightening. "I did what you taught me," she whispered. But the room didn't answer. The silence was different here, heavier. It didn't heal, it haunted. That first night, she dreamed of the valley again. The wind, the smoke, the sound of a single casing hitting the dirt. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, hand reaching instinctively for a rifle that wasn't there. For a long moment, she just sat in the dark, listening to her own breathing. Then she got up, made coffee, and watched the sunrise through the kitchen window. Different horizon, same ritual. By the end of the week, her inbox was full. Military publications wanted her for interviews. A late-night show wanted her story of resilience. Someone from the Pentagon asked her to appear at a leadership summit. She read each email once, then deleted it. She wasn't angry, just tired of being reduced to a headline. The silent sniper, the woman who saved a SEAL team alone. They loved the myth. They didn't care about the truth, the fear, the exhaustion, the blood under her fingernails, the faces she couldn't forget. So she ignored them all and focused on what she could control. Mornings at the range, afternoons teaching at the base, evenings running along the water. Repetition was her peace. 2 months after her return, she was invited to speak at the Naval Academy. At first she refused, then she reconsidered. Not for the admirals, not for the brass. For the cadets. For the young women who still sat in the back of classrooms and wondered if silence meant they didn't belong. When she stepped on stage, the auditorium fell quiet. Hundreds of uniforms stared back at her, rows of polished shoes and rigid posture. She adjusted the mic but didn't use notes, didn't need any. "My father used to say the loudest people in the room aren't always the strongest," she began. Sometimes, they're just the ones afraid of being forgotten. She paused, letting that sink in. I was quiet once. People mistook that for weakness. They were wrong. Silence doesn't mean submission, it means control, and in the chaos of combat, control saves lives. The audience didn't move. Sophia continued, her tone even reflective. You'll be tested by the job, by people, by doubt. You'll be told you don't belong. Let them talk, because while they're wasting breath, you'll be gaining ground. She stopped again, looking across the crowd. And one day, when it matters, you'll act, and you won't need anyone to announce it for you. The right people will know. The world will know. There was no applause at first, just silence, deep, resonant silence. Then slowly, hands began to clap. Not loud, not rushed, just steady. Sophia nodded once. That's enough. And with that, she walked off stage. Backstage, an admiral approached her, medals gleaming, smile polished. Lieutenant Marquez, he said warmly. That was powerful. You could inspire an entire generation. Sophia looked at him evenly. That's the hope. We'd like to feature you in the Navy's upcoming recruitment campaign. A face like yours, your story could. She cut him off politely. Sir, with respect, I didn't do what I did to sell anyone a slogan. The Admiral blinked. Of course, I only meant. I know what you meant, she said, softer this time. But silence isn't a brand, it's a principle. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Sophia offered a faint, professional smile. Thank you for the invitation, Admiral, but I already have a mission. She walked away before he could ask what it was. Her mission found her again, one morning at the training field. She was sitting in the observation tower, watching a group of recruits run drills below. One of the instructors climbed up beside her. Ma'am, there's someone asking for you. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Press. He shook his head. A kid, civilian, says she wants to be like you. Sophia stood slowly. Where? Outside the fence. The girl couldn't have been older than 16. Hair tied back, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes bright with nerves and admiration. When she saw Sophia, she froze. You're really her, the girl whispered. The sniper. Sophia smiled faintly. I'm really Sophia. The girl hesitated. My name, Aaron, my brother's a Marine. He told me your story. He said you changed the way he thinks about women in combat. Sophia nodded. Your brother sounds smart. Aaron's voice trembled slightly. Do you think someone like me could do what you did? Sophia studied her for a moment, the hope, the fear, the quiet determination. Yes, she said simply, but you won't have to do it my way. What do you mean? Sophia stepped closer, lowering her voice. I fought to be seen. You'll fight to be believed. And someday, someone like you won't have to fight at all. That's how change works, slow but unstoppable. Aaron nodded, her eyes wet. Will you teach me? Sophia smiled. When you're old enough. Until then, learn everything you can. Be quiet when they talk and listen harder than anyone else. Silence will always be your advantage. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, another silver casing, newly engraved. She pressed it into Aaron's hand. Keep it, Sophia said, and when the world tells you no, let your silence speak. That night, Sophia sat alone by the window, city lights glowing beyond the glass. For the first time since the mission, she felt something like peace, not the absence of pain, but the understanding that pain could mean purpose. Her phone buzzed, a message from Reeves. You be proud. New unit just finished sniper quals. Half of them wear your casing. She smiled. They're not mine, they're ours. Reeves replied, maybe, but they learned from the best. Sophia stared at the screen for a long time, then typed one last message. No, they learned from silence. She set the phone down, leaned back and closed her eyes. Outside, the wind moved softly through the night. For once, she didn't chase the noise. She let the silence have the last word. End of Part 5, 1603 words. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, where the story deepens into Sophia's inner reckoning, exploring the cost of her legend, her struggle with identity beyond war, and the moment she's called back into the field for a mission that tests whether silence still defines her? You said. Zix. ChatGPT said. Here's Part 6 of The SEAL Sniper's Dead. The enemy shouted, then her bullets cut them down in silence, continuing seamlessly, exploring Sophia's quiet conflict with fame, purpose, and what happens when she's called back into the shadows for one more mission. The invitation came on a Tuesday. No warning, no ceremony, just an encrypted message delivered through her old Navy line. Requesting consultation for Special Operations Review, urgent. She read it twice, then stared at the blinking cursor. It had been almost a year since she left active combat duty. A year of teaching, mentoring, speaking, doing the kind of work that healed others but didn't quite heal her. She told herself she was done, that her war had been fought, her silence spoken. But as she read the message, something inside her stirred, not excitement, not fear. Recognition. Because the truth was, she never left that mountain, not really. The next morning, she boarded a military transport bound for Virginia. The base was familiar, same salt in the air, same gray hangars lined like soldiers waiting for orders. When she entered the operations center, Reeves was already there. He turned, smiling faintly. Didn't think you answer. She set her bag down. You knew I would. He nodded. Yeah, I did. There was a pause, the kind that carried unspoken history. Then he gestured toward the table. We've got a situation. The screens flickered on drone footage, satellite maps, terrain overlays. Reeves' tone shifted, professional again. 3 weeks ago, an Allied convoy disappeared in northern Kurdistan. No distress call, no recovery. Our analysts picked up a signal, faint, intermittent, near a remote canyon. They think it's one of ours. Sophia studied the terrain. The canyon looked too familiar, steep, narrow, impossible to access without exposure. She said quietly, looks like Shazak. Yeah, Reeves said, different continent, same trap. He paused before continuing. They want someone who understands ambush terrain, someone who's been in that kind of silence. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Consulting or field? Reeves hesitated. Technically, consulting, realistically, you know how these things go. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Yeah, I do. That night she sat alone in the base dormitory, gear laid out on the bed, not as an officer, but as a habit. Barrett cleaned, sidearm checked, knives oiled. Old instincts resurfaced with each movement. Her hands were steady, her breathing even, but inside something trembled. She built a new life on the idea that she'd moved past the fight. But the fight had always been her language. And now it was calling her again. She poured herself a cup of coffee, leaned against the wall, and stared at her reflection in the dark window. You said you were done, she whispered. The reflection didn't argue. It just stared back, calm, sharp, inevitable. 2 days later, the transport plane roared over a barren stretch of desert and touched down near a temporary forward base. Sophia stepped out, wind whipping through her hair, sand stinging her cheeks. Different place, same silence. The team waiting for her was small 5 operators, all young, all staring like they'd just met a ghost. One of them, a sergeant with a scar under his eye, spoke first. Ma'am, we heard stories, didn't think you were real. Sophia adjusted her gloves. Most ghosts are. They laughed nervously. Reeves came up behind her, throwing a map across the hood of a Humvee. We go in at dusk, scout the canyon first, locate any signal source and get out clean. Simple in theory, complicated in practice. Sophia studied the map. High ridges on both sides. You'll be flanked before you hit the choke point. Reeves looked at her. Suggestions. Go in quiet, she said. No engines, no radio chatter. Set overwatch at the western rise. The canyon amplifies sound. If they're listening, you'll give yourselves away before you see them. Reeves nodded. You volunteering for overwatch? Sophia looked at him, calm and certain. That's where I belong. They moved out before sunset. The light stretched long and golden across the ridges, turning sand into fire. Sophia took point as they hiked toward the overlook. The young operators followed her silently, steps careful, eyes scanning. When they reached the ridge, she went prone, unzipping her rifle case. The Barrett slid free, smooth and familiar, the metal cool against her palms. Below, the canyon yawned open, a scar in the earth, wide enough to swallow a convoy and quiet enough to hide 100 secrets. She adjusted her scope, scanning the shadows. Nothing. Then faint a glimmer. A piece of twisted metal half buried in the sand, a wheel rim, a burned-out truck. Her gut tightened. That's them. Reeves' voice came through her earpiece. We see it, moving in. Sophia's eyes tracked every movement, every flicker of dust, every shift of wind. Something felt wrong. Too still. Too easy. Minutes passed. Then the silence cracked. A flash, a blast. The canyon erupted. Contact, someone shouted over comms. RPG trails streaked upward from the rocks below. Machine gun fire tore through the haze. Sophia's heart dropped. It was Shazak all over again. Except this time, she wasn't the unseen sniper waiting to intervene. She was the one who'd seen it coming too late. Reeves pulled back. It's a static. Then nothing. Smoke filled the canyon, thick and blinding. Sophia adjusted her scope, searching. Movement, shapes darting between rocks. 10, maybe 15 hostiles. She locked in, exhaled halfway and pulled the trigger. The shot thundered through the valley, echoing against the cliffs. One target dropped. She chambered another round, another. Her rhythm returned, mechanical, precise, mercilessly calm. Team respond, she called. Static again. Then a voice faint, broken. Reeves hit cover. Copy, hold position, she said. Her words were steady, but her chest burned. She could hear the fear in their breathing. Young operators. Too young to have learned what she did. That silence saves, but only if you listen before it's too late. The sun dipped behind the ridge, turning everything red. Sophia's scope flashed as she moved positions, crawling along the ledge, keeping her angles unpredictable. Her hands were bleeding from the rock. She didn't notice. Her world had narrowed again. Breath, aim, release. Below, the fight was chaos, but within her scope there was order. She found the lead gunner, tracking his movement through the dust. Exhale, squeeze. He fell. Another moved to replace him. Exhale, squeeze. Gone. She moved again, fast, efficient. Her hands remembered every motion, every calculation. It was the same dance she'd done once before, but this time, it wasn't about proving herself. It was about saving them before they made the same mistake she once watched happen to her team. After 8 minutes, the gunfire began to fade. Smoke still hung in the canyon, thick and swirling. Reeves' voice finally came through, ragged but alive. Marquez status. She exhaled. Overwatch clear, hostiles down, you okay? Minor injuries, you. She looked at her hands, blood, dirt, bruises. Still breathing, she said softly. Reeves laughed, weak but genuine. Didn't think you'd come all this way just to retire again. Sophia smiled faintly, eyes still scanning the horizon. I never said I was good at retirement. Hours later, they exfiltrated under moonlight. The team was shaken but alive. Sophia walked at the back, silent, eyes distant. When they reached the transport vehicle, Reeves handed her a canteen. "You saved them again." Sophia shook her head. "They saved themselves. I just reminded them how." Reeves studied her quietly. "You keep saying that, but I've never seen anyone turn chaos into silence the way you do." She took a sip, wiped her mouth with the back of her glove. "Silence isn't about stillness, sir. It's about control." He nodded slowly. "You think you'll stay this time?" She looked out at the horizon, the endless dark broken by a thin line of dawn. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe I don't need to stay anywhere. Maybe I just need to go where the noise is until it learns to quiet down." Back at base, the debrief was quick. Standard language, standard protocol. But the unspoken truth hung heavy between them. The same truth Reeves finally said aloud as they stood outside the command tent. "You're not just a sniper, Marquez. You're a compass. You remind us what right looks like when the noise gets too loud." Sophia didn't answer. She looked at the rising sun, the light cutting through the dust, the way the silence filled everything after the last explosion faded. Then she said softly, "We're all just trying to find quiet in the chaos, sir. That's all war really is." Reeves nodded. "And you found it." She smiled faintly, for now. That night she sat alone outside her quarters. The desert wind moved softly across the sand, carrying whispers of things unsaid. She took out a small notepad and began to write, not for command, not for records, for herself. Each line short, steady, deliberate. Silence isn't absence, it's presence. It's the moment between chaos and clarity. It's where you hear who you really are. She tore the page out, folded it, and slipped it into her jacket pocket beside the silver casing. Then she looked up at the stars, infinite, quiet, alive. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled without weight. The storm rolled in without warning. Rain pounded the tin roof of the barracks like gunfire, steady and relentless. Thunder cracked over the horizon, echoing off the mountains, a sound Sophia had never quite learned to separate from memory. She sat alone at her desk, elbows on her knees, eyes locked on a flickering lamp. It was supposed to be her last night here. The mission had ended, the reports were filed, command had offered her a flight home at dawn. But she hadn't packed. Her gear lay untouched on the cot, the Barrett half cleaned, disassembled, pieces of her own silence scattered across the room. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what came next. Reeves found her there, sometime after midnight. He didn't knock, just stepped in quietly, closing the door behind him. "You're still up," he said softly. "Old habit." He nodded toward the rifle. "Can't sleep until the weapon's clean, right?" She smiled faintly, something like that. He pulled up a chair, sat across from her and waited. "You're not getting on that plane, are you?" Sophia didn't answer. Reeves exhaled. "I thought so." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've done more than enough, Marquez. You've earned rest, real rest." She looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, steady. "Rest doesn't come easy to people like us." "Maybe not," he said, "but you deserve to try." She met his gaze, then calm, unwavering. "Deserve has nothing to do with it, sir." Reeves studied her face, then said quietly, "You're afraid of what happens when the noise stops." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not afraid." "Then what?" She looked toward the window, rain streaking down the glass like falling stars. "When everything goes quiet, there's nothing left but memory." Reeves nodded slowly. "And that scares you more than bullets." Sophia didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because he was right. When the storm passed, dawn bled across the horizon like slow fire. The base stirred to life, engines starting, boots thudding, radios crackling awake. Sophia walked out into the cold air, coffee in hand, the scent of wet earth thick in her lungs. The sun caught the edges of her dog tags, flashing briefly before the light faded. Peace always looked beautiful from a distance. Up close, it just felt fragile. She wandered toward the perimeter fence, stopping at the edge where desert met sky. She'd been at this edge before in different countries, under different flags, chasing the same impossible thing, stillness that lasted longer than a heartbeat. Behind her, footsteps approached softly. It was the young sergeant from the last mission, the one with the scar beneath his eye. "Ma'am," he said carefully. Sophia turned. "Sergeant, I just wanted to thank you for what you did out there." She nodded once. "You did fine." He shook his head. "Not like you. When everything went bad, you didn't panic. You just knew." Sophia gave a small, almost sad smile. "Knowing doesn't make it easier." He hesitated, then asked quietly, "How do you live with it?" "What?" "The quiet after." Sophia looked out at the open desert again, the wind tugging at her jacket. "You learn to stop fighting it," she said. "You let it sit with you. The silence isn't your enemy, it's the reminder you made it home." He nodded slowly, eyes down. "Maybe someday I'll understand that." "You will," she said, "but it takes time." He started to walk away, then stopped. "They're saying you're leaving again. Is that true?" She took a long sip of coffee, watching the sun climb higher. "Leaving where?" she said quietly. "I don't think I ever really came back." That afternoon, Sophia went to the range one last time. She stood alone, the desert stretching infinite before her. The targets blurred in the heat haze, distant shapes waiting for precision. She set the Barrett down gently, ran her hand along its barrel. It had been her voice for years, the way she spoke when words couldn't reach. But now she wondered if she'd grown too fluent in a language that only existed in war. She loaded one round, took aim. Her breathing steadied, familiar rhythm, ancient ritual. But when she squeezed the trigger, she didn't feel the usual calm. She just felt empty. The shot echoed across the plain, sharp and lonely. She lowered the rifle, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "Enough." Then she picked up the casing from the ground, warm, shining, delicate in her palm. She slipped it into her pocket next to the silver one her father had given her. Two symbols of silence, two lives marked by it. That evening, Reeves met her at the flight line. The transport plane waited, engines humming low. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, squinting against the light. "Going back to teaching?" he asked. "Maybe," she said, "maybe something else." "You always say that." She smiled. "That's because something else keeps finding me." He chuckled softly, then grew serious. "You know, they'll never stop telling your story. You've become the kind of myth the next generation looks up to." Sophia glanced at him. "Myths don't bleed." "No," he said, "but they remind the rest of us why we keep trying." She considered that, and when the myth gets tired. Reeves looked her straight in the eye. "Then she teaches the next one not to make the same mistakes." Sophia nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's the mission," she said quietly, "to make ourselves unnecessary." Reeves smiled. "That's the best kind of mission." The flight crew gave the signal. It was time to board. Sophia slung her duffel over her shoulder. Before she stepped onto the ramp, Reeves called out, "Marquez." She turned. He gave a small, two-fingered salute. "For what it's worth, the silence speaks louder because you're in it." Sophia paused, eyes softening. "Then I guess I'll keep listening." And with that, she disappeared into the aircraft. The flight lifted through the last of the twilight, the desert shrinking below. Sophia leaned her head against the window, watching the earth fall away. The clouds rolled in beneath her, soft, endless, weightless. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the two casings, her father and her own. Together, they gleamed faintly in the dim light. She held them for a moment, then closed her hand around them and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the medals she never took, not to the legends they built from her silence, but to the quiet itself, the part of her that never left the mountain, the part that kept her alive. Hours later, when the plane touched down, the world was different. Not safer, not simpler, just quieter. Sophia stepped onto the tarmac under a gray morning sky. The air was cool, the lights soft. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, and smiled, small, real, human. Whatever came next didn't need to be written in reports or carved into legend. It just needed to be lived. She adjusted her pack and started walking toward the terminal alone, unhurried, unafraid. Behind her, the engines roared to life again, lifting others into the noise. Ahead, only stillness waited. And for the first time, she didn't mind. End of Part 7, 1668 words. Would you like me to continue with Part 8, the final chapter, bringing Sophia's journey full circle with an emotionally resonant ending that ties her father's legacy, her silence, and her purpose into one reflective, poetic conclusion? You said. 8. ChatGPT said. Here's Part 8, the final and poetic conclusion of the SEAL sniper's dead. The enemy shouted, then her bullets cut them down in silence. This part closes Sofia Marquez's journey, not with fanfare but with quiet strength, redemption, and the understanding that silence was never her weakness. It was her weapon, her truth, and her peace. She woke before dawn. No alarm, no orders, just the soft rhythm of rain against the window and the distant hum of a city still asleep. Her apartment looked different now, not because it had changed, but because she finally had. The walls weren't empty anymore. Photos had returned, her old team, her students, the girl named Erin who once stood outside a fence with bright, hopeful eyes. There were reminders everywhere, but none of regret, only memory. Sophia stood in the kitchen barefoot, a mug of coffee warming her hands. The air smelled like rain and earth and something clean, something new. She'd been home for 6 months this time. No deployments, no missions, no shadows waiting on the edge of her thoughts. Just quiet. But even peace, she was learning, had a sound. The sound of chalk on a blackboard. The soft thud of boots on the training ground. The laughter of recruits trying, failing, learning. Sophia had taken a position at a naval sniper training program, not as a legend, but as an instructor. To them, she wasn't the silent one or the ghost of Shazak. She was Ma'am, or sometimes Lieutenant M. She liked it that way. Every morning she walked the range before the students arrived, checking wind speeds, setting distances, adjusting targets. Then she'd pause at the far bench, her bench, and look downrange at the endless stretch of open land. She could still feel the weight of her father's casing in her pocket, still hear his voice telling her that strength doesn't always need to shout, that silence could carry more power than any bullet. And every time she looked through a scope now, she didn't see enemies or angles or targets. She saw lessons. Patience, control, presence. The things that kept her alive, and would keep them alive too. One afternoon, a new group arrived, fresh faces, eager, restless, loud. She let them talk, argue, compare rifles, brag about accuracy scores. Then she stepped forward, quiet and calm. Settle down. The word cut through the chatter like a blade. They turned toward her, and recognition spread slowly across their expressions. Whispers rippled through the group. That's her. Sophia ignored it. She set her rifle down on the bench, glanced at them, and said, "Out here, noise is your enemy. You don't control it, it controls you." A young man in the front raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you once hit a target from 2,000 meters in a sandstorm?" Sophia met his gaze, unreadable. "Maybe, but I missed one from 200 because I forgot to breathe." The group laughed nervously. "She didn't." "That's your first lesson," she continued. "Breathing saves more lives than bullets. Learn it before you touch that trigger." And with that, she walked down the line, correcting grips, adjusting stances, moving with quiet precision, a ghost-turned-teacher. Later, as the sun fell and the range emptied, she sat alone on the bench again. The air was cool, the sky streaked with gold. Her phone buzzed, a message from Aaron. Accepted into Annapolis. Thank you for believing in me. Sophia smiled softly. You did that yourself, she typed back. Just remember, silence speaks louder. She set the phone down and stared across the field, watching the last of the daylight fade. Every choice, every scar, every moment she thought would break her, all of it had brought her here. Not to the end, but to understanding. That night, she returned to her apartment and opened the small wooden box she kept on her shelf. Inside were the two casings, her father's and hers. Beside them lay a third, clean, polished, unmarked. She made it herself. For the next one. For whoever came after. She turned it over in her palm, feeling its weight, its smoothness, its silence. Then she placed all three together and closed the box. Her father's legacy, her mission, her future. 3 lives connected by one truth. That strength isn't measured by how loud you fight, but by how long you endure. Weeks later, the program held a ceremony. Graduates ready to join the next generation of special operations. Sophia stood in the back, arms crossed, watching them receive their badges. When it was over, one of the instructors approached her. You could have said a few words, Lieutenant. They'd have listened. She smiled faintly. I already did, just not with words. The instructor tilted his head. You think they understood? Sophia glanced at the graduates, standing straight, silent, still. They will, she said. One day they'll understand why silence matters. That night rain fell again, soft, steady, unending. Sophia sat by the window, watching it streak down the glass, each drop catching the light like a trace of memory. She thought of the mountains, the deserts, the faces she'd left behind. The ones who didn't come home. And then she whispered quietly, You're still here with me, every one of you. The words drifted into the rain and vanished, carried somewhere far, where maybe someone needed to hear them. Later, she wrote one final note in her journal. Peace isn't silence. Peace is learning to live with it. She closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and turned off the light. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the horizon, but it didn't scare her anymore. Because now she knew what her father had always tried to teach her. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was memory, purpose, proof that she had survived the noise. In the morning, when the first light of dawn touched her window, she woke and smiled, no alarm, no orders. Just another day. Another chance to listen. And as the sun rose, golden and soft over the water, she whispered the words that would never make it into any headline or report, but would live on quietly in every soldier she'd ever taught. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.